Hi and welcome to Magic Numbers, and this is episode number 58. When did that time pass? And the topic today, Fog of Brothers War. I'm going to be talking about navigating early format data without falling into some data traps. And it's a very broad topic. Part of it is going to be general, but based on Brothers War. So I'm going to look at how you can look at the data and why talking about strength of the color early in the format is maybe overrated because you need to take many other things into account before you actually figure out which colors are good. And also, it will change throughout the format based on what people are doing on the pods. And the second part is going to be just looking at the first, actually, not the first weeks, because I discarded all the data from the first week. But I'm going to look at the second week and whatever bit of the third week that we had of the data, looking at each archetype and which cards seem to be important and which cards seem to be doing pretty well. So let's jump into my preamble as always. And today's preamble is: red is the strongest color, is not granular enough to be informative. And what I mean about it is that I understand that it's a need for content creation to have statements that are quite absolute. And this is probably going to be the most absolute statement that I will make in this podcast today. I hate absolute statements because they miss a lot of subtlety. And yes, they are important to make. It's important to give people an overview of which color is the strongest one in the beginning. But it goes to the point when lots of the meaning of what does a strength of the color mean is being lost. And today's preamble is going to be short. I'm not going to blab about it because I have like 10 slides after that to state my case about it. So power has many faces, especially when it comes to, colors in limited. Because when you talk about the power of the color, you talk about at least 5 things, and I'm pretty sure that you can come up with more of those. You will talk about the raw card strength in a particular color, and that's important. Some color will have stronger cards, that's true. You will also talk about the openness of the color. Of course, the color is going to be strong when no one is drafting it in the first days of the format. And very often, the statements that, oh no, red is busted, blah, 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 these statements will be based exclusively on the fact that the color is wide open and you can pick like best cards at the times where you shouldn't be able to pick them. And of course, if you can pick strong cards when you shouldn't be able to pick them in the later format, it will sort of even out. The color is going to be strong because you have access to the cards that you normally wouldn't be dreaming of getting that late. Then there's the context of the set. There are cards that are strong in one set and weak in the other, and sometimes the card will just align very well with what the set is trying to do. In this format, the pacifism variant is a quite strong card, and in some formats it's absolutely rubbish. Because in the context of this set, actually pacifism is not bad for several reasons. I mean, there's also a slight boost in the actual pacifism variant because I think that the scry 2 that it provides is actually worth, like a 2/3 of a card, which makes it playable, basically. There is also synergy. And again, this is part of the context of the set, but some colors will be stronger because they are more synergistic on average than the other colors. And there is the part of build optimization. Some colors will be weak in the beginning of the format because we are just not smart enough to make good builds. And that might change over the format because people will work hard on trying to optimize those builds. And when you figure out the key cards and the important synergies and the interactions between them, the decks will become better, but not because the color all of a sudden became better, but just because we know how to build decks. And this is like not a universal rule, I think, but that's a pretty decent rule for many formats, is that in the beginning of the format, aggro decks are going to be much better because they are much easier to conceptualize, because they usually rely on relatively simple and straightforward synergies of I have some 2-drops, some tricks, some removal, and I push damage through that. So those are several of those powerful things that you can be doing. There is also a fifth one where you can basically change the evaluation of the cards. Very often, first week, people don't know what to draft, and especially those beginning players will draft bad cards, and that will change quite rapidly over the course. Because if they play enough limited, they will see what beats them, and they will start drafting the cards that beat them, and therefore the cards that are powerful in the first week because they're wide open are going to be slightly less picked. And this time, I'm not talking about the openness of the whole color, but just of a sheer reevaluation of the power rankings in the color. And the longer the format is being played, the more games every single player on the pod has played, the less likely that they will completely miss best common in the pack because they don't know that it's the best common. And the longer you play, the more they will know that. So if a very good card is seventh most popular card being picked on Arena in week 1, it might become a second most picked card in week 5, and then of course it will change completely how you evaluate the color power. So to go a bit into that by looking through the data, we can look at the Jake. Yes, Uncle Cardboard very acutely observed that red is the strongest color because it has the highest win rate. Oh, come on, don't edit it out. God, he's got powers that I can't possess, like editing of things. But we can start simple. This is the data from the first 2 weeks. And I calculated the win rate of each individual color. As you can see, red is the strongest color, 56.5% win rate. Then we have white, 56.3%. And then we have a big drop. So red and white are like clearly the strongest color in terms of the win rate. Then we have a big drop of a whole 1 percentage point to 55.2 with blue, 55% with green, and 54.6 with black. So obviously you can easily conclude from that red is the busted color and black is like absolutely unplayable because it has a whole 1.9 percentage points lower win rate than red. Obviously, if you look at the win rates of colors, the differences will never be that strong because, well, usually you play a color with another color and that sort of evens out the playing field and minimizes the differences. But of course, this is just not enough in terms of making a proper analysis. So let's go a bit further in that, and let's add the time component. If you look at just the week 1 and week 2 and the same metric, win rate of the colors, you can see that white is sort of stable, blue is sort of stable, black has actually dropped quite a lot from the beginning. So it had 55% win rate in the first week, and now it's got 54.2, slight drop. Red also had the slight drop from 56.9. So it was really, I mean, in the first week, really the red decks did have an advantage over everything else, but it starts dropping to 56.2. And then green also like 55.2 to 54.8. That's a small difference, really, but there is some drop. So basically, most colors dropped because 17 lands players usually have an advantage over the first week because they are junkies for content and they read all the set reviews and they listened to all the podcasts that told them what to draft. And they did watch the data from the first couple of days and they realized quickly which cards are good. The rest is catching up quite quickly. So there is a slight drop of the win rate of the 17 lands players over the first week. So adding time already changes the view ever so slightly. Then we can also look at the time, but not only the win rate, but also the frequency of playing of the colors. And you can see that people started really the 17 lands user. I have to add, this is the data from 17 lands users. So I'm only looking at how frequently 17 lands users are playing something. We would have to look at 17 lens users' opponents' color preferences to figure out what they are playing, but I don't have that data yet, so I couldn't have calculated it. But you can see that the most popular color in the first week was black, 22.2%. It dropped slightly to 21.7% in week 2. This is barely above what you would expect. I mean, on average, people should play the color 20% of the time. Second most popular color in week 1 was red with 21%. But this went up to 24.2 in week 2. So there's like a significant increase in playing red. 17 lens users jumped on the red train and they started bashing red because I'm not going to spoil, but because of something. And then we saw green was the third most popular color, but that's marginal. All the three other colors were played more or less the same, 19%, 18.8, something like that. Green weaned off slightly, so it was 19.3, now it's 17.8. Blue also waned a bit, 18.7 to 16.5, so the two and a bit percent change. And white increased a bit in playing. It was 18.8, now it's 19.8, so almost as you would expect. But there was an increase in people playing white over the first weeks, after the first week. So we can look at both of those in the same graph. We can see the frequency of red playing increased, at the same time the win rate of red decreased, and that can be explained by many factors, including openness of the red, availability of the cards, but also the kind of players of 17 lens users that played red predominantly. So it might have been that in the early games, slightly better players jumped on the red bandwagon earlier, and then more intermediate players started playing it, and that caused a decrease. We see that even though the frequency of playing white increased, the win rate also slightly increased. That's an interesting observation. We see that black, even though there was not a big change in frequency of play, there was a drop in win rate. Now, obviously, keep in mind, this is based on large sample sizes, but still, there is quite a large error on those measurements. So it's really hard to make an absolute statement of which color is the most powerful. I mean, with the sample size, you can sort of say that that red and blue are better than the other two in the first 2 weeks, but just barely, because there should be like 1% error, and only then you only had like 95% confidence to that data. Sorry. So after we look at those rudimentary metrics, like just the color win rate and frequency of the playing of the color, and maybe added some time, you can start thinking about other more complex metrics that can expand this picture. So first we have openness, and I defined openness as availability of good cards, because I don't care that like this absolutely rubbish card, you can pick it every time and you will see it a lot. I want to see how many of the good cards you will see. Now, how to define a good card? You can do it in many ways. I made a very arbitrary decision that if it has a win rate of over 56% game in hand, it's a good card. There are pluses and minuses of that approach, but I could have gone for maybe top 10 cards of each color, but that comes with another can of worms. I went with the arbitrary decision of looking at the cards above a certain threshold of the win rate. And I want to calculate the likelihood of finding a color somewhat open. So, of course, the more cards I will see in my pod from a particular color, the more the color is open, because I can get more good cards out of that color into my deck. And I calculate everything in cards per pod. So, if a common is open and it wheels all the time, I will get 2.4 copies of it in a draft, because it always wheels and I can always pick it in a draft. I do some simplifications in those calculations, because good is enemy of perfect. If I had to calculate exactly what was the distribution, if the car wheels 60% of the time, what is the distribution of the wheel? I'm just simplifying that to, if it has alpha over 8, it will always wheel. If it has alpha below 8, it will not always wheel, and I calculate what fraction of the time it wheels. Slight simplification, just for you to know. It shouldn't influence the results that much. So if you look at the openness of the color, and I don't even look at the aggregate from the 2 weeks, I instantly split it into 2 weeks data. White didn't change, 27.6 cards opened per pod. Opened, mind you, you don't see all of them, you just opened them in your pod on average. And 27.6 in week 2. Blue had 17.2 good cards opened in week 1 and 14.8 in week 2. Black had 23.2 cards open per pod, good cards open per pod in the first week, and only 13.3 in week 2. Now, why are those changes there? Because some cards have a lower win rate in week 2 than they had in the week 1. And that creates quite a large difference in Black, actually, over those 2 weeks. So already you can see that if you drafted Black in week 1 and in week 2, you have a big difference between how many of those good cards you will see in those weeks. And Red also has a drop from 28.9 in week 1, and that's why Red was so powerful, because so many good cards were open, and Red was really strong, to 21.7, which is quite a big difference. And Green, again, 25.5 to 18.9, so also a slight drop in the number of good cards open. So what we can see from that is basically already looking between week 1 and week 2, white didn't change, but all the other colors have slightly fewer good cards because of the slight decrease in the win rate of the players, but also which pushed some cards below the threshold that I set arbitrarily. Now, there is also another aspect of it, because not only you will change how many cards you open per pod that are good, but the preferences of the 17 lens user picks will also change. So this is the number of good cards that the player will see per pod. So this is basically the mixture of how many are open and ALSA, and then you can calculate how many you will see on average. And then in white, you remember you opened the same number, 27.6. But in the week 1, you saw 16.8 of them, and in week 2, you see 16.2 of them. So you can see from that despite opening the same number, you see slightly less of them, which means that the pick preference changed ever so slightly in favor of white. So people started picking white a bit higher. Blue, you saw that there was actually quite a large difference, a bigger difference in cards opened than the cards seen, which means that despite fewer good blue cards being open per pod, you see more of them. So the actual preference of the people for blue cards had waned somewhat, and we'll see it in the next slide, but just to give you an impression. Black almost halved in terms of how many good cards you see per pod. You saw 15.2 in the week 1, and now you see only 7.2. Now, when you think about it, if you only see on average 7.2, like strategy of forcing Black X decks will be very risky, because there is a good chance that you will not make it on playables, because you see so few good black cards in the draft. Now, obviously, this set is slightly easier because there's plenty of decent artifacts that are colorless and are not in this statistic. But still, 7.2 is quite low number. And plenty of artifacts also count as black in 17 lens statistics, so that's important. I needed that gulp. Hey, Mid Moses. Red, again, we see a drop from 21 that you saw in the first week, which means that in the first week, you saw 21 cards of red in the pod. I mean, yes, you probably were not able to pick all of them, but even if you pick like 16 of them, you had almost a deck on average pod. And then imagine that you're in a good pod when red is underdrafted. You can easily go mono red, no problem. This dropped to 13.6. So from being by far the most open color, red has dropped to being second and basically in the middle of the pack, quite behind white. And green also dropped from 17.1 to 12. So basically this data shows you that if in the first week, lots of colors were quite wide open. Right now, basically only white is pretty much wide open. There is medium open, blue, red, and green, and black is really hard to get into because combination of decreasing win rate that dropped some cards below the threshold, and people still liking black has caused that it's too contested to consistently draft it. So this is the changing of this is the recalculation of basically cards opened and cards seen. So I take the cards seen per pod and divide them by the cards that were open, and you can see what I was telling you, that There was a slight decrease in white caused by the change in the pick preference. There was a slight increase in blue, again caused by the change in pick preference, where people actually avoid blue slightly. There is large drops in black and red. So once in sorry, sorry, I have a little cold, and that's gonna be a problem. You saw 2/3 of the good cards in black that were open in your pod in the first week. Now it dropped to 54%, and you saw 70, almost 5% of the red cards in that were opened in your pod in the first week. Now it's only 62.5. So quite a big drop in how red is being evaluated. People jumped on the red bandwagon, and you will not see as many as in the week one. Therefore, the strong red from week one is becoming weaker and weaker, not because the cards changed or anything, but just because it's more challenged. So it will be harder and rarer that you will find open lanes in red as the format progresses, it seems. And green didn't change that much, so that's good. Now, I also calculate the number of cards taken per pod. Obviously, this number is an average. It doesn't mean that on average that in every 17 lens user picks 3.5 cards, white cards per draft, good white cards per draft. It probably means that in some drafts they pick 10, and in some drafts they pick 0 because they are not drafting white at all. But those averages will still give you some impression on how people are jumping on a particular color. And you can see that white actually increased ever so slightly from between week 1 and 2. So people picked average 3.52 of the good white cards. Now they pick 3.5. And the other colors just dropped. And it dropped not only because people pick less of those cards, but because there are less of those cards available. So there's like two things that are overlapping on those. Blue didn't change much, but black went from 3.2 cards picked on average per pod to 1.8. So like a good 40% decrease. Correct me if I'm wrong. And then red dropped slightly from 4.5 to 3.8. So it's still the most preferred color to draft by the players. It's just that they have to be content with cards that are not in this over 56% win rate group that I defined as good cards. And green also dropped by quite a lot, by 0.9 in terms of how many green cards, good green cards, are being picked. And this is just a fraction of those good cards that you see that people take. So this is basically how many good cards do you see? No. How many good cards average 17 lens user takes per pod divided by number of how many cards they see per pod. I think the biggest difference was red. In the first week, people took 20% of the cards that they saw, and it became 28%. So this is really like showing you that they grab those red cards. Like a quarter of, more than a quarter of good red cards that they see are being taken. That's preferential to how much red they draft, because they only draft 20. Where's the frequency? Damn it! They only draft 24% of their drafts as red, which means that they have really strong preference for those high win rate cards, and they pick 4 percentage points more than you would expect by just pure chance of those. So there is a preference of drafting those strong cards. Black also, quarter of the cards that good cards that people saw, they take them, and white, there's also an increase of like 3 percentage points. And this means that basically 17 lens players have a strong preference for certain colors, and also already identify which cards are the good cards and are drafting them above what they do in a particular color. So they actively deplete the pools of cards or on their pods from those good cards, because they will draft them also when they are not playing, and they will always take them given the choice, which, or not always, but a lot of the times they are given a choice of that card and maybe a lower win rate card, they will pick a higher win rate card. There is a preferential selection of those cards. Probably not because they know by heart the numbers and they have this threshold of 56% in their head, but a combination of, consuming content, understanding the basics, knowing more about the format, they just will jump on those cards much more aggressively. And this is still a superficial analysis of what you can talk about, which color is the strongest, and this doesn't give you still like all the information that you can get. I mean, if we go back to my first slide, we didn't sort of calculate the raw card strength. We sort of looked at the openness. We don't look at all at the context of the set and or the synergy, and we don't even talk about the deck building optimization at all. We just looked into the card power into a slightly more granular way, and it took me 20 minutes, 25 minutes just to go through those basics. And that's why I am not very keen on the sweeping statement like red is the strongest color, because in a week red might not be a strongest color because it would be way too overdrafted, especially if sweeping statements like red is the strongest color are going to fly around the internet with the frequency that they do right now. And I think that even though I know it's important to state those kind of things and guide players into what is good in the format, I think that in the long run, depriving them of this granularity is damaging for their development as a limited player, because I think it's not bad to tell people that things are a bit more complicated than just a simple answer, red is the strongest color. I think it's actually beneficial for them that they start thinking that why is red the strongest color, and actually start answering the question, is it because of the openness, or is it just because it's so powerful? Is it because 90% of the red decks were red-white and red-white seems to be the good one, or is it because all the red decks are just strong because red is just a driving force? So I think that we shouldn't be sheltering people that are starting to play the game from this kind of subtlety, because that will hopefully aid them in their development as a player. Right. And that's it for part one. Then we can go into a bit more granular thing and look at the color combinations. And that's going to be the second part of the presentation. So first of all, we can look at which colors are the most winning. And here we have a clear winner. Week 1 or week 2, Boros is the strongest archetype in the format. It wins the most. But I do think that week 1 Boros was the red-white deck, and week 2 Boros possibly was a white-red deck. Slight change, but an important one nonetheless. Because obviously you can see that the red dried out a bit and white became like the most open color, and I think that jumping on this white bandwagon was the thing to do in the last week. What is going to be the thing to do next week, that's time will only tell, but normally the format is stabilizing ever so slightly after 2 weeks, so we can expect that what we saw last week and what we will see in the next week is going to be the defining moment for the format. And from now on, we can actually start looking at trying to solve the format, because the format is now stable. And once the format is stable, then you can try solving it. You can't try to solve the format when the pick orders are still evolving, because, the problem with that is that you're trying to solve something that is changing, and those changes might impact your solution, and it might turn out to be absolute pointless because it changed so much that your solution is a solution to a problem that doesn't exist anymore. But nonetheless, Boros, high win rate, that's a useful point of data, because it didn't change over time. It has a high win rate, and it has the highest win rate, and it had the highest win rate in week 1, so that didn't change. So there's a good signal, at least, that Boros, if it's open, you should jump on it while you can. Interesting change from week 1 was that Azorius, which was there and about knocking on top 3, but became solidly in the second place with 57.3, still like a percentage point below Boros, which I think is significant as a difference, on the border, but significant. Now, the second best deck on week 1 was Gruul, and that dropped. It dropped from 57.2 to 56.5. Small, but substantial change because it moves it from top 3 to outside of top 3. But generally, those top 4 decks didn't change. There is Azorius, there is Gruul, there is Izzet, and there is Boros on the top spot. So Izzet, Gruul, and Azorius are the sort of chasing pack. Izzet, it's worth noting, didn't change also between week 1 and 2. And also, it's important to note that Azorius is the only archetype of those 10 that actually increased its win rate after week 1, so in week 2. Then we have what was the sort of like chasing pack in week 1 with Dimir, Rakdos, Selesnya, Orzhov, and Golgari. And they were all sort of bundled together around 54.5, 55.5% win rate. And there's been changes in there. So basically, there's been 2 of those decks that had a larger drop of win rate, Dimir and Rakdos. Rakdos dropped from 55.6 to 54.4. Dimir dropped from 54.7 to 53.2. Still, around percent. I would again think that this is a sort of significant change in win rate. Selesnya didn't change much. Was 55.2, is 54.9. Golgari also didn't change, 55.1 to 54.9. So these decks sort of stayed in this chasing pack, while the other ones sort of slightly dropped down further, especially Dimir. And then there's Orzhov with, it was 54.4, it is 53.9. This is below 1 percentage point difference, so hard to say if that's a significant change or not. I mean, statistically, it won't be significant. Is it important? Time will tell. It seems that Orzhov has some problems in how people are building it, and it will be interesting to see if we can find some consensus, strong builds of that archetype. And we have the Red Lantern in Simic. Unfortunately, and yet again, Simic is played very little. I don't think that people invest a lot of time in trying to develop Simic strategies, and that's another format that's happening. I don't know if there is a good strategy for it, but I do know that in some formats there were decent strategies that needed a bit of working, and if not for the solitary attempts of Sam Black to try to make Simic work, probably nothing interesting would happen in that solution space. But Simic was the lowest in week 1 with 52.8 and dropped further to 52.2. So that's pretty low. Average win rate is around 55.5% for this format so far. So it's 3 percentage points below the average win rate. Looks like a tough time to be a Simic mage. Might as well that I'm not. Okay. So this is the picture of how the archetypes are looking right now. And I'm going to go one by one, each archetype, showcasing some cards just to give you food for thought on how to build those decks and maybe what are the interesting strategies that are available there, which are the maybe cards to watch, which are the cards that you definitely should never miss if you're playing a particular, if you're building a particular archetype. Yeah, that's a good point from Man Moses that Boros is great because you can build a great deck from just commons. And that's been a feature of Boros decks for I don't know how many formats. I think that if you look at the last 10 sets and you make an average win rate of each color pair, Boros is going to come out on top easily. Just because they make it not too cute. They never try to put like a weird theme in Boros. Most of the time the theme is attack with creatures. And guess what? That's a good theme. Attacking wins games. Drawing third card in a turn, not necessarily. So some design. The table is slightly tilted in Boros's favor because of the design. Actually, when you think about when Boros was at Dwarves, when they tried to make something cute with it. Well, Matt Moses, you had the cute archetype in Strixhaven. Remember that one? Well, yeah, MTM. I mean, the samurai was another theme that failed in Boros because it was not really attacking. It was only attacking with one of them. No, you want to attack with all of them. That was rubbish. And then Strixhaven theme of removing something from graveyard was also not very successful. Okay. So let's start with Azorius. I'm going just like with a boring order of starting with Azorius and finishing with Gruul, and basically going through the letters of Wooburg. It was a bit of a surprise to me, but the top common for Azorius. So I'm going to have the same structure: top card, hidden gem, and potential trap. Trap defined as a card that has relatively low alsa, which means it's picked quite highly, but disappointing win rate. These are the cards that you have to sacrifice a high pick to get them, and because they have a low win rate, they don't deserve too much reward. So the top card is Ambush Paratrooper for Azorius, 60.8% game and win rate. Now this is like a solid uncommon win rate. So if you're playing Azorius, you pick any copy of that card. It's pretty good. I played with it a bit, and it was lovely. I played it in sealed, and I had like the thing that makes 4/1/1s, and I played like a weird Selesnya version of Go Wide. So I had to make 4/1/1s. I had like Go Tall kind of potential with the Yoshan Dissident, and I mean Ambush Trooper is such a phenomenally good target for the +1/+1 counters as well, on top of everything. And it was like an all-star in that game, in this deck. Like it was really doing Lord's work. Lawrence's Escape is my hidden gem because the card goes really late. It wheels probably like 80% of the time, 70% of the time, and has a 60% game in hand win rate. That's a lot. I guess you probably want to play 1 or 2 in your deck as a way of countering opponents' removal for 1 mana. The Scry one is not nothing. It's definitely been performing for me in white decks in general. The trap that I found was Evolving Wilds, because Evolving Wilds is picked very highly in this format because there is not much fixing. But in this particular archetype, it has pretty low win rate. I think it's mainly because there is no additional synergies that Evolving Wilds can trigger. As someone in chat said, in Boros, Moses said, in Boros, it's not going to be a trap because, of course, if you have the 1/2 goblin that you can sacrifice, whenever you sacrifice, it becomes a menacing 3/2. Well, you want several copies of Evolving Wilds, and maybe that way you can also thin your decks to get more threats. But in Azorius, it doesn't do much. And I think that the games are just long enough that you will draw into your both colors fine without having to splash. And the cost of picking up a card rather than a land rather than an active spell for the deck might be quite a lot in this format because the density of colored cards is lower because there's so many artifacts, and unfortunately most of the colorless cards are just poor quality and low win rate. So this means you will have fewer cards that you can put in your decks because lots of it is this colorless fluff of tower workers and power plant workers that you probably 90% of the time don't want to play in your deck. So because of that, you need to treasure your colored cards a bit highly, and Evolving Wilds in a deck that where it doesn't play any other role might come. It is a real cost not to pick a spell over that. In terms of the uncommons, I will do the same as previously, but I will also always show the signpost because I think it's important to know what the signpost, how the signpost uncommon does in the context of the color pair. Remember, Azorius is the second most winning archetype, so it has currently 57.3. Reminder, this data is from week 2 and above, so from the last 8-9 days. So I don't take week 1 into account at all, showing those numbers. So here we're looking at 57.3 win rate of Azorius. Yotion Tactician Design Pool says 60.9, so this is like decisively a higher win rate than the average for the archetype, which means that Yotion Tactician is actively good in this archetype. So fine. Turns out pumping up your soldiers is pretty good if you have many soldiers, which in white blue you will. The top card as an uncommon Zephyr Sentinel card is busted. What's there not to like? A flesh creature, a 2/1 with flying for 2 mana. Also can counter a removal spell later in the game, and then it becomes a 3/2. Great. I mean, there's literally nothing that you shouldn't like about that card. The hidden gem that I found is Yotion Frontliner. That's in case you don't know, for the podcast listeners, I do have some of those. It's a artifact, 1 mana, 1/1. Whenever it attacks, another target creature you control gets +1/+1 until end of turn, and it has Unearth for 1 mana. So, like a great early attacker can chip in for 2-3 damage itself, can enable attacks later in the game, because on turn 3 you can attack with this and your 2-drop, and your 2-drop becomes a 3/3, and maybe they will still have to trade with the Yotion Frontliner later in the game. You have some flyers or whatnot, you unearth it and you boost your flyer to go lethal, so it will make 3-4 damage. It will have some triggers of anything. There's plenty of little synergies with that card, and it has an excellent 59% win rate, and is still undervalued by the general population because its ALSA is relatively high. And as we all know, high ALSA means that the card is not picked highly. I'm just checking its ALSA exactly, but it was something. Yotion Frontliner 4.7, so it will wheel probably like 30% of the time roughly, and it will go like pick 5-6 quite frequently. So that's not bad for a premium. Let's call it premium uncommon or upper middle class uncommon. Trap, Take Flight. That card has very bad numbers. This is the 4 mana aura. It gives +1/+1, +1/+0, and flying to a creature. And whenever this creature attacks, you draw a card. Well, 53.5 is just below. It's seriously below the average win rate. 4 percentage points below average win rate is not good. I guess part of it is that already so many of the blue-white creatures will have flying naturally, so part of it is just wasted. And then the draw a card does not seem to give much to the aggressive deck at that stage of the game. At that stage of the game, you want to be closing it up, and this is not really pushing you forward to do that. So potentially a trap, but I can believe that there are some builds where Take Flight is going to be good. I just don't know how they look exactly. Now, Orzhov, top common, and I put it on purpose here. Of course, it has slightly higher win rate, but it was still literally the top common of Orzhov is Scrapwork Mud, the 2 mana rummaging 2/1 that has Unearth for 1 and a red. And yes, you may say, but Orzhov doesn't have red. Who cares? Scrapwork Mud is still good, and it still has 60.8 win rate. And actually, when you think about it, the sample size for it was smaller than the actual black and white cards, but not much smaller. It was like maybe a quarter of the sample size of the most commons played in the Orzhov decks. So enough for me to actually consider it. Hidden Gem, Moment of Defiance. Of course, if you watch my my episode about new heuristics in Limited, you will know that combat tricks have usually a much higher alpha. They go much later because people try not to put more than 2 combat tricks in their decks, which means you will have availability of those cards that is higher than of the normal card. Like if that was a removal at this win rate, you would never see it past pick 3. But because it's a combat trick, it will wheel with quite reliable predictability. So know that this card is important, but also know that you can speculate on wheeling it when you have maybe slightly weaker but more desired card in your pack. You can sort of gamble on picking both that card and the Moment of Defiance, which will also tell you if there are people interested in doing the same as you do in your pod. Mercurio, I mean, because this can have so Mercurio is asking that's interesting about Scrapwork Martin Orzov. Does this mean that there are some common unearthed creatures it's okay to play in decks that have no way to pay the unearthed? Now, first of all, it's not necessarily a given that they don't have a way of paying unearthed. Very frequently, those decks will have one Chromatic Star or the Energy Refractor. That's the thing, or maybe even one Mountain because they have Evolving Wilds or something. So all those kind of small things will usually let you unearth it. And I think that, I mean, probably there are decks where you happily play Scrapwork Mud just as a 2-1, but I would probably want to have at least one way of unearthing it at some stage of the game. And yes, and there like the white one, the 3-1 Scrapwork Cohort, is very frequently appearing in decks that don't have white as one of the main colors because it's just that good. Right. So Moment of Defiance, don't sleep on this card, but also know that you don't have to sacrifice high picks to pick it because it will wheel. And if it's open in your pod, you should be able to get it at some stage. And the big trap, Gixian Skullflayer. That's basically a trap in every black archetype. I just didn't put it as a trap in most of them just to give you a bit of variety of cards that I'm describing. But oh, oi. But 49.3% win rate is just pathetic. In a deck that potentially will have some self-mill, because both white and black self-mill creatures are pretty good. So you want to play it. Still, Gixian Skullflayer just doesn't work. You know, these cards are very tempting because you see those situation when you're gonna have them online in turn 4 and they start growing. But the reality is that if you do that, they will kill it. And if you don't do that, you're ending up with a 3-mana 2/3. And that's the sad truth about Gixian Skullflayers of this world. In terms of uncommons, Hero of the Dunes, 57.3. Let's go back to the archetype slide. Orzhov has 54% win rate roughly, so it's higher than the average, which means it sort of works. It's not an impressive win rate, but it's also because Orzhov as an archetype is a slight failure. The top card, Recruitment Officer, and this one has really high win rate, 61.7. This is a first pickable uncommon. It works in multiple archetypes very well. In this one in particular, because it gives that extra attrition grind that black and white likes. And also, technically, the theme of that archetype is the creatures with mana value 3 or less. And I'm not telling you that you should play this kind of I don't think you should play into that archetype at all. But just by design, there will be just more creatures with 3 mana value 3 or less in those colors because WotC tried to force the archetype. Therefore, there is going to be more of them. So naturally, your decks will be enriched in those creatures, and therefore the ability is going to be valuable. Ooh, promotion of channels. Anyone has a promotion of bans? The hidden gem is Ashnod's Harvester. This card looks very unassuming, but it has really, really, really good numbers across the board. So I wanted to showcase it a bit. 59.9% win rate, solid. That's a 2-mana 3/1. Whenever it attacks, exile target card from a graveyard. This ability in many games will be worth a card or two. The fact that you can unearth it and attack with haste and get rid of something, nab something from their graveyard, is a really strong ability. So yeah, definitely pick it highly, because this is another one of those that you can splash sometimes, because the 2-mana 3/1 is not something bad at all in this format. And the trap, reconstructed top there. Now this card had really decent numbers in the first week, and in the week 2 it just like went really bad, especially in Orzhov. So that's why it's worth looking at the timings. I think that week 1 decks were much more happy playing this card, and now it just slightly became what it is, a 3-mana 2/1 flyer with maybe deal 2 damage at some stage for another 2 mana. Still could be good in some decks that have more sacrifice synergies, but not in Orzhov. 48.3 is really low. Okay, Boros, our most powerful archetype, and therefore the king of all the commons, is Scrapwork Cohort. Top card in this archetype, 62.3. That's really good uncommon win rate. Like best uncommons are approaching that number. Now, card doesn't need much introduction. 4 mana, 3/1, which blocks fantastically, which attacks awkwardly, especially when you have some kind of a trick potential. And even when it dies, you can just unearth it, threatening another portion of damage, which probably warrants a block, and still makes the 1/1s an unearth, so it will always create a lot of bodies. Hidden gem in this archetype, and actually in many others, is Aeronaut's Wings. 2 mana equipment. It gives +1/+0 and flying, equips for 2. Now, 59.1% win rate for that. I was impressed, and it was not the only archetype when it was in top 5 commons. So numbers slightly smaller, but I think that then those numbers warrant at least to be careful about the cards. And yeah, I think they were also good in white green, for example, if I remember correctly. But general numbers on the Aeronaut's Wings are pretty good. Let's look at white green. Yeah, they're the second most. No, they're actually the top. They're the top common of the bloody white green in terms of win rate. I don't think that they are so strong in other colors, but at least white red and white green, they seem pretty good. Let's maybe look at Gruul, because I don't remember that by heart. Yeah, Gruul also number 3 in terms of commons. So yeah, don't sleep on that card. Black red. Nope. Black red, no bueno. So this card will be really specific to some archetypes, I think, unless we still didn't find the builds where it will be strong. But Boros, Selesnya, and Gruul, the Naya colors, love the Aeronaut's Wings. Trap Energy Refractor, 52.8, and it's a highly picked card, so just don't want that kind of shenanigans in your Boros. It's not on theme. Aeronaut's Wings does nothing, but when it enters the battlefield, but next turn actually in the late game it might do something. But it does support your theme of smashing face of the opponent. Energy Refractor is a king of Dirtling, and one thing that Boros doesn't want to do is Dirtling. In terms of the uncommons, the Signpost is solid at 60.7%. Keep in mind that's only 2.3% over the win rate of the archetype, which is 58.4. Top card is Static Net. Now that card is just busted, 63.4. But that just puts you in Scrapwork Cohort in context. Scrapwork Cohort is going to be played much more frequently in those decks than Static Net, which means it will cover a wider range of decks. Static Net will probably be frequently in the decks where white at least was wide open, because you get it either when you open it or when you're going to get it past, and it will not get past in the pods where white is slightly more closed. But Scrapwork Cohort might squeeze through because not everyone still knows the power of that card. And still, Scrapwork Cohort has 62.3, just a percentage point lower than Static Net, the top uncommon of the color combination, which is the strongest color combination. So this just shows you like just how powerful Scrapboard Cohort is. Still, Static Net Busto, even if the Power Stone doesn't do that much in this archetype, 2 life is nice for racing, and the removal is pretty solid. So that's you don't sleep on this card. Hidden Gem, I picked Mishra's Research Desk. That's a really good card for Dirtling, because this one, gives you this reach. It lets you play maybe fewer lands, because you can play this one on turn 1 and then look for a land if you really need to. And late in the game, it sort of becomes like a divination at a low cost, which is great for this deck. A trap, I picked Lay Down Arms. Card is picked still highly. It's just not good enough. The effect is not good enough. The 3 life is too much, I think. The fact that it won't kill everything if you don't play like mono white is too much. And the sorcery speed is just not enough. So all those things make Lay Down Arms into a card that is just not good enough in the limited environment. Unless you play mono white, but even there, I don't think it has extremely impressive numbers. I'll check in a second, because obviously I didn't. Yeah, it's 57% win rate in mono white, which is okay, but it's still like lower than Static Net, Combat Thrasher, Yoshan Frontliner, and Recruitment Officer. It's still lower than all of those cards. And we don't have data about any other card, which means that it's the lowest win rate uncommon in mono white decks because of lack of sample size. But still, it does not impress there. It's okay, but it doesn't impress. And once you add red to the picture, the chance of nabbing something that you really want to is lower, and that's just too big a risk. Selesnya. Now, as you can see, Aeronaut's Wings, or as you cannot see if you're listening to this as a podcast, I picked the Scrapboard Cohort as a top common. It has 59.1 win rate. And my hidden gem, Aeronaut's Wings, has 59.3. This is mainly because the sample size for Aeronaut's Wings is much smaller. And I thought picking a card with that much smaller sample would be a bit unfair towards the Scrapboard Cohort. And I couldn't put Scrapboard Cohort as a hidden gem because it's not hidden. It's a gem. It's just not a hidden one. It's there in the open, staring in our faces every second game, and we thinking, damn it, I was so close of actually doing some attacks, but now that's gone. But yes, still, Scrapboard Cohort is strong, and Aeronaut's Wings is powerful in this particular archetype. It's a nice combination of chunkers and early aggression. Aeronaut's Wings can do the job done, do the last few points of damage, let you break any stalemates that might arise, and then your early aggression is still valid on turn 5. The trap, Power Stone Engineer, 2 mana 2/1 that dies into a Power Stone, just not enough. It's just not enough. The fact that you can't have this effect at will in white green it just means like if it seems to the opponent that giving you this Power Stone is a bad idea, they will just not give you the Power Stone. They'll just take 2 damage a couple of times. If they think it's a good idea, they'll just block it and you have a Power Stone, but most likely you can't use it very efficiently. The fact that big chunky creatures are not good in the format just means that in this particular archetype, it's not good enough. It dies during the attack, so you won't even get bonuses from your artifact enters the battlefield effects in the right moment. So that's quite unfortunate. Uncommons, Yoshan Dissident, 55.7. It's low, but I think that it's in part because how people play it. I think that what is the Celestia's win rate? I'm going to be having to rewind much more every single time I do it. Celestia's win rate, 55% roughly. This one has 55.7, so slightly above the average. I think that this card is better than the numbers suggest. I think that there are builds when it's excellent, but you need to build a bit more towards it. it falls into the sort of trap when you play it on turn 2, you just have a 1-1, and when you play it later, you probably won't play too many artifacts at that stage. So there is a conflict in this card. I think that in reality, this card should have been a 1-drop, but of course it can be because it's a signpost. Then it could have been a 2/2. And before you think, oh my god, that would be just crazy. Uh, you had the enchantment version of that creature in Kamigawa, and was a 1-mana 1/1, and it was a strong uncommon, but it was like fine. I mean, it was not busted. Um, so I think that all those options would be possible, especially that like, remember the enchantment, making enchantment cheaper lifelinker from Kamigawa. Uh, it was like 2 mana, 2/2 lifelink, and it made enchantment cheaper. Great card, and no one again had problem with that. Yeah, Jukai Naturalist, that's the one. So I think that the Ocean Dissident could have been slightly bigger, even for the same cost, and then we would have been talking about the card that can actually do some damage. Because there is a big difference when you play it on turn 2. You play like Opportunist on turn 3, put a counter on Dissident, and it attacks as a 3/3. That's a different story um, than having a 2/2 and still not being able to attack. Then it's much better to put the counter on the Dissident, on the Opportunist. But if you do that, then you already skip like several attack stages, and maybe next turn you still won't be able to attack favorably if you built your Opportunist perfectly for Excavation Explosion or something like that. So yeah, this card has conflict, but I still think there is good builds. I don't know. I didn't see the Lords versus Resources, but I saw that Ethan had 3 of them, and it worked for him. So maybe multiples is the solution. Anyway, long and winded sidebar about the Ocean Dissident, but I think that it's important to think about this card because I think that it has potential, and that potential probably can be better used than the numbers suggest. Top card is Static Net. Yeah, still good. Still good. Didn't change anything from Boros. It's still good. Hidden Gem. I picked Mask of the Jade Crafter. It has a really high numbers. Also, it's a card that I speculate will be good before the release of the format. So I'm going to use any moment to commemorate my good takes from before the format was released, and so we can forget all the bad ones. But yeah, the card is really solid. I mean, it's also good with the Ocean Dissident. I had a deck with 2 Ocean Dissidents and 2 Masks of Jade Crafter, and it was good because it can make 2 artifacts quite easily if you really want to. I did have a game where I just played it and sacked it for 1 to make a 1/1, and yeah, killed with a flyer. And then as a trap, I have Gaia's Courser. This card, I think that this card could have been decent in some formats, like in a slower format where you have stuff in your graveyard. Like, imagine this thing in Terra's block when you are self-milling actively, when you have the escape creatures, and you have this guy that can draw you some cards before you so you can actually get into the mana when you can escape something, and then you escape something and you finish off the game. I mean, it might have been better, but I think this aligns pretty badly with this format, unfortunately for it. And it 51% win rate, it's just not good enough, especially as much as especially if that you have to sacrifice high picks to get it, because it's still picked quite highly. Yeah, Unearthed is a bit like doesn't combo with it very well. Maybe it's better like in Golgari, but I'm assuming that even if in Golgari it's going to be maybe marginally better, but not great. Where is it? Mm, 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 mm. Oh, do I have to go that low? No, it must be somewhere there. I must have missed it. Am I blind? Gaia's Corsair, 55.3 in Golgari. So better than this, but nothing that will make me faint from excitement. Dimir. Oh, here's the card that I talked a lot before I started the episode. Overwhelming Remorse, the card, the name of which I know very well. Is the top card of Dimir, 58.2% win rate. Yeah, good removal. Again, recommend to listen to Mystical Dispute, where Tuda Cubed, aka Carl, uh, discusses that card with G Guards, aka Gareth. So you can get more in-depth knowledge about it there. So I don't have to ruin my perfectly sound voice. Hidden Gem is the Synchronized. Now this card didn't have like good start of the format, and I was for a second there. For a second, I was worried that um, my take from before the format, that obviously it will be busted and will be also very, very, very much undervalued, was wrong. Luckily, week 2 confirmed exactly that. Card is very much undervalued. It wheels all the time and is one of the better blue commons point. It has really high win rates in every blue combination deck. Pick it highly. Scry 2 is almost draw a card. This is a common version of bounce something on top, draw a card, and that's a good card. So play it. Um, Trap Goring Warplow, and that's a trap in almost every single deck that it's in. Here it has 52.4% win rate. Demir, mind you, sorry, Demir has a relatively low win rate. It's 53.2, so this card is slightly below the average, but still, that's just not good enough. It just aligns so badly with this format. It's like you can play it for a very underrated 1/1 Death Toucher for 2 mana, or you can play it as a 5/4 for 6 mana, which is also underrated, and it doesn't do anything good. It doesn't do anything good in either of those incarnations. So yeah, just sad. All those prototype cards are occupying the trap spot, and you should maybe draw some conclusion out of it. I think that my rule for the prototype cards in this format so far, and looking at the data, is if it doesn't have an enter the battlefield effect, or if it is not hard to kill, just don't. So most of the time, don't. Now, for uncommons, the Signpost Evangel of Synthesis has 58.6% win rate. That's solid. Just play the card when you're in the mirror without any stress. It's definitely way above average for the archetype. Top card at all is Ashnod's Harvester, 61.5%. Now this card, I'm really like impressed by the numbers of it, because it looks pretty unassuming. It does a lot of small things, but it's not like I'm looking at it and say, wow, that's amazing. But the numbers are mind-boggling, like really, really strong. So yeah, definitely don't sleep on that card. Hidden gem I found was Knowing Vermin. That's a 1 mana, 1/1 ATB. Target player mills 2 cards, which will frequently be, draw maybe a third of a card, because you might get one of your unearthed things. When it dies, target creature you don't control gets -1/-1 until end of turn. Glad that they put this little clause so you don't have to kill your own creature. Yeah, but it seems solid. You can like it. Look how perfectly it lines against the scrapwork cohort. They can attack with the 3/1. You block it, you kill the soldier, and you solved 2/3 of the cohort with 1 card, which is a good deal in this format. So that's pretty decent. Trap obviously is prototype card. This is the hulking metamorph. It's a 9 mana 7/7. It can clone one of your creatures with ETBs, or it can be a 3/3/4 4 mana. 51% win rate. Just avoid unless you figure out a way how to break the format with it. I don't know. You have a Platinum Angel or something, and you just copy it, and you have 2 Platinum Angels, and that's how you plan to win, I guess. Izzet. The top common for Izzet is Goblin Blast Runner. This is just to remind you that this card is not only a card for Rakdos. You can easily find some sacrifice synergies just playing red, and some evolving wilds, and maybe a couple of the artifacts that you can sacrifice. Easily you can do that, and you can play this nice tempo game with a Goblin Blast Runner. And those artifacts that you sacrifice, what are they good with? Well, Mindstone Animation. Thank you very much. You can easily put your Mindstone Animation on Chromatic Sphere. Yes, there is also Strong Bull in that archetype. Yeah, definitely. You can put your Mindstone Animation on Chromatic Star, draw a card, attack for 4. If they kill it, you draw another card. What's not there to like? And the trap, and guess what? It's a prototype card. Blitz Automaton. It's, I was expecting slightly more from this card, to be fair. Like 54.2 is not like an atrocious win rate, but it's pretty low even for the Izzet decks. Look at Izzet is like 57% win rate. And here we have the Automaton that has 54.2. That's 3 percentage points below the average, and that's just not good enough. I'm really sad that that prototype as a mechanics sort of failed, because it will, in the long run of this format, and I think that this format will have a relatively long run, it will take away some possibilities of what you can do in it. And I think that over time it might become a problem. And there is only one thing that I think failed me more than the prototype in this format. And I will talk about it at length in some next slide. In terms of the signposts, 63.2, third part, Iconoclast. That card is a busto. It's by far the best card in the archetype, but it's also a signpost, so it fit in the signpost slot. It's the reason to become Izzet, in my opinion. If you see it, later in pack 1, just snap it and just start being Izzet, and you're going to be fine. I mean, hopefully. At least it means that you have some people that are absolutely not interested in Izzet on the way, which is weird. I played with it. I played with 3 of it. It was good. It was easy times, easy going. The fact that this casts non-creature spell opens so many opportunities, because your Mishra's Bubbles, your top card of the archetype, by the way, Mishra's Research Desk, are just becoming so great. It's fun. So play it. And, like in the end, you make so many 1/1s that you manage to kill your opponent just by the sheer volume that you generate. Mishra's Research Desk, a card that is super impressive in this format so far. I selected the Hidden Gem and one of the cards from the archive, whatever it's called, retro framed archive of artifacts. Springleaf Drum, mainly because I've seen it being played by content creators recently more and more. I think that here it has particular synergies, because you will have those cheap artifacts in this archetype. You really want to play them. It allows you to ramp a bit. It allows you to utilize your resources more efficiently. It is a non-creature spell, so it adds to that kind of theme as well. If you have a bunch of those cheap artifacts, you can easily play it instead of a land, which sort of increases the density of your spells. So think about that. The trap, I picked Foundry Inspector. Card is picked very highly and has very bad numbers. 49.7% win rate. And this is consistent across other archetypes that we're going to see later. I didn't see Foundry Inspector being played a lot in the previous ones, but I've seen him a lot played in those the color combinations that don't have white, and it doesn't look good. The numbers on it just doesn't seem to be working. I thought that this card would be just okay because it's an archetype artifact set, but turns out artifacts just failed on many ways. Like one problem is that apart from the unearthed ones, all the artifacts at common and from the actual set are just bad. They have really low win rate, and that's sad. And I think that it was a design feature, but I think that they overdid that feature. They should have been at least to some extent playable. I understand the trap. If all the artifacts are good, then the decks will feel samey and there won't be distinct archetypes. But completely nerfing artifacts in the artifact set is also not a great strategy because it just confuses people, I think. Well, at least now we know artifacts not very good, except for the cheap count-tripping ones. The more they cost, the more scary it is to play them. Boom. Simic. Top card. Scrapwork Mod. Sad, isn't it? Oh, that definitely is an artifact common that worked out very well. Already a second archetype that does not have red in it, where Scrapwork Mud is the top card. 58.9, very solid numbers. It's just a good card, and that's it. It just shows also the weakness of Simic in particular aspects to have this as a top common. Hidden Gem, Desynchronize, another archetype when the card is performing well, which means that the card is good, most likely. Pick it higher because it wheels all the time. We know that arena players in general are averse towards this type of card. I don't know why they are averse, but you might as well abuse it if you are not averse because you know that the card is good. Trap Wing Commando, 51.1. Card is generally disappointing. I was hoping for a bit more about it, but it seems like there is no like red, blue spells deck that wants to attack on this. I'm sorry, it's almost 1 a.m. That attacks on this kind of level just doesn't work very well. Shame. 51.1 is a low win rate. Signposts. Battery Bearer has 54.2. That's pretty low, but it's still about the average. Tells you a bit more about Simic. Top two cards are Topter Mechanic and Levitating Statue. Topter Mechanic is just a very good card on rate. Whenever you draw a second card each turn, put a +1/+1 counter on it. It's a 2/1 for 2, which is already all right. And when it dies, create a 1/1 colorless Topter. So actually, opponent will always be slightly behind for trading with it. Trap, and this is what grinds my gears from this set. Urza, Power Stone Prodigy. Now, when I was starting to play the game, in the 80s or something, there was no Urza card, and we always were like speculating, like like when you after the tournament you're driving back from some PTQ in the middle of nowhere, and you're chatting about, and we were like discussing, oh, how would Urza card look like? It was not a common that I will have to pass because it has an atrocious win rate. So, Urza and Mishra are such classic characters of the game that it's a bit sad that you have to like pass them and that they are rubbish at uncommon level. I get it. There's a rare version and there's a mythic version, and there was an Urza before and it was rebusted. But come on, can't you make them into like sort of like mythic uncommons? Would it cost that much to make them playable instead of Thopter Mechanic, who I don't care about? Anyway, maybe it's for us to rest a bit after the legend overdose from DMU. Rakdos, top card. I'm pretty sure that Scrapwork Mud was probably on the top of the list for you if you would bet what is the best common in that color combination. Still good, nothing changed. Hidden Gem, Excavation Explosion. I just put it there because I wanted to put it there. Card is good and it never appears because it's always number 2, but it's pretty strong. A trap, Goring Warplow, still very low win rate. Doesn't matter which archetype it goes into. Uh, yeah, Armoric. I just wanted to put this card because I felt sorry for it because it's a good common and it was not on a single slide. So I just put it here. Sue me. In terms of uncommon, Junkyard Genius 57.7 is good. It's not great. It's good. It's above average. Card is solid. End of the story. Top card in that archetype is Horned Stoneseeker, 60% win rate. This is a great common. 2/2 Menace makes a Power Stone, takes away Power Stone, but weirdly generates you a sacrifice trigger if you really want it, if it dies. So if you sacrifice it, you get 2 sacrifice triggers. Nice. Hidden Gem, and I would like to be very, 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 very strongly stress this is based on a very tiny sample size, but I thought it was interesting, and I still don't understand exactly what kind of things you put in your graveyard, but you put something. It's Disciples of Gix. That's a 6 mana 4/4 for Phyrex and Human. When they enter the battlefield, search your library for up to 3 artifact cards, put them into your graveyard, and then shuffle. But yeah, I guess that the secret is you put some unearthed creatures, or maybe you play like a weird reanimator and you put something big and you reanimate it, whatnot. But oh yeah, Flying Ninja mentions that it's basically a Lord Tupperware special, so maybe Ethan just pumps up the win rate of the card on his own, like he did with the Yosha Declares War. But 58.7% win rate is good, and at least it's worth thinking about how to abuse this card because it goes atrociously late, so you'll always have access to it when it's there. Loader, yeah, he might not like the card now, but probably he played with it enough to pump some numbers because yeah, the sample size is like 200 games, which is below the standard I would normally take. That's why I'm stressing it very hard. But I thought it was interesting enough to mention that this card might be interesting to some extent. Trap Mishra. I just had Urza as a trap. Now I have Mishra as a trap. Well, 50.3 is pathetic. It's pathetic win rate for one of the legendary epic characters of the game. What's he? Make better legends, like the classic ones. I'm not talking about some legendary Kithkin that no one knows about. But Mishra. It's Mishra, young Mishra. I know, but he was pretty smart as young. He's a prodigy, for God's sake. It's written on the card. Golgari, my personal favorite in terms of archetypes, but that might be because my LGS people let me draft it as I please. Top common is Moment of Defiance, 58.9, and that card wheels all the time. So think about it. It allows you to stabilize and race. I think that's the important role of it, and also allows you to use attrition very well because you draw a card of it. Usually, you make it into a 2/1 if you can. I did play a deck where I had the golem that makes other golems, and Moment of Defiance in that deck was really good because what's better than 3/3/3 golems is 3/3/5/4 golems with lifelink that also draw me 3 cards. That's a good combo. I would highly recommend playing it, although you might want to have some kind of security to help them. I had that in Gaia's gift, so that was pretty good. Hidden Gem, Ravenous Gigamole. It's going late, and the card is increasing and increasing in terms of win rate, especially good in Golgari. 58% is a strong win rate for a common. Don't sleep on it. I think that the Gigamole is a real thing, and the numbers are in favor of it. Trap, Power Stone Fracture, that was speculated to be a really strong removal, but I don't think it lived to its promise. I'm sure there are decks when it's very strong, when you have like multiple Ecor Wellsprings and things like that. But in general, because you don't play against those super big creatures that frequently, its power is slightly diminished because, of course, it's much easier to trade a 1/1 for a 5/5. But playing this to kill a 2/2, not the greatest of deals. So I would probably think hard about what do I want to achieve from my deck by playing Power Stone Fracture. And I'm pretty sure it's going to be better in like black-red, when actually sacrificing something might give me a benefit on top of what I'm doing, than in the Golgari deck when I'm trying to make attrition and wasting resources like that to kill something small is just not a good deal. Bra. Top cards for Golgari. Skyfisher Spider, 63.9. That card is busted. Just that's really a reason to be Golgari. You can build a whole deck around this and a couple of the emergency welds and just can win the games just by having this. So play it. It's very strong. Top card of the archetype. I mean, obviously, the top card is the Skyfisher Spider. It's always good when the signpost is also the most winning card in the archetype. But apart from that, the top card is Obstinate Baloth, and you can see the gap. I mean, it's almost 4 percentage points between Spider and the Baloth, and the Baloth is still a decent card. Well, Gigamole, to be precise, Trezio, is 6.02 times 10 to the 29th. Thank you. All the chemistry people can clap. Obstinate Baloth, 60.3% win rate, solid card. Again, play it all the time. Hidden gem I picked in this one is Audacity, slightly smaller sample size, but 57.8 is a good win rate. I guess a bunch of those things like Baloth don't have. Oh, okay. You're editing the podcast that I did with you. Okay, that makes sense. I was thinking, Josh, what are you talking about? Yeah, but 57.8 is a decent number enough that I will mention Audacity. Golgari doesn't seem like the most aggressive of the archetypes, but it definitely wants attrition, and Audacity drawing your card when it's put into the graveyard is just value, and it can push some damage, and it can force some blocks, which is not a terrible thing when you have a carefully positioned Moment of Defiance. So you can trick your opponent into having to kill a particular creature, and you say, aha, +2/+1 lifelink. Who's the buffoon now? Trap, Battlefield Butcher. That card was already there in my 2 weeks ago presentation from the very first data, and it didn't move up. It's still pretty low win rate. Golgari is a tier 2, let's say, archetype, and it's still below the average for that. So that card, I was hoping for good things for that card, and I mean, it looks like it sort of aligns well because it's like a 1/4 in the format where the best common is the 3/1, but still it doesn't work somehow. I mean, I thought, like you play a 1/4, you stall the board, and then at some stage you start pinging them for 2. I guess that the fact that it probably would have been better if it drained for 1, because sometimes those green decks will have a problem of survival, and maybe draining for 1 would be better than pinging for 2. But I don't know. Gruul, last archetype. Top card, Gaia's Gift, 59.7. Card is good. I mean, obviously you can't play many, or can you? I tried to live my dream of playing green-red prowess by having 4 prowess creatures, 3 Gaia's Gifts, 2 giant growths, some whirling strikes and stuff like that. But unfortunately, I bumped into decks that had a lot of 6/5 golems, and it didn't work very well for me. Hidden Gem is a giant growth. It does have solid numbers. You probably need a particular deck for it, and it's always available for it. But I don't think the numbers are strong enough to suggest that you should be playing them at least sometimes if you have a deck that is built to utilize giant growth the most efficiently. Trap, Rust Goliath, Gruul doesn't want to ramp as every deck in this format basically. So yeah, Rust Goliath. No, the Springbok. I think Rust Goliath is sort of a trap. Maybe there are some decks that will do well with it, but it's just like maybe later in the format when people stop respecting possibility of a prototype because they will be just so used to that they do nothing. Maybe it will become decent. But I think like 10 mana means that you can never play it with protection, and because you can't ever play it with protection, is just open for removal at that time, and you just invested 10 mana to get it disenchanted. It's just not good enough. Uncommons, Arbalist Engineers, 58.3, solid, like really solid. Just below the top card, which is Obstinate Baloth again. So nothing to sing about, nothing to cry about. Baloth is Baloth. It's just the same as in the previous archetype when we discussed it. I think that Hidden Gem is interesting in this one. Alloy Animist. Lots of people were low on this card, but it seems to be doing okay in Gruul. So think about it when you're drafting that it might be a secret red-green card, because Gruul is the deck when you will have some of those cheap artifacts and be able to animate them. And animating 4/4 beasts is exactly what you're trying to do in the format anyway, so that might be useful there. And disappointment of the week, Mishra at 48.2%. It's not even worth picking it up when it falls on the floor. I'm not bullying the poor Mishra. I didn't design that card. I didn't make it bad. I'm just pointing it out. What, am I Tokasia? Are you calling me Tokasia? Anyway. Game. Oh, wait, no, that's the wrong podcast. Sorry. But that was the last card I was going to discuss. And we managed to survive the 1.5 hours of my melodic voice without me completely losing it. Before I go, big thanks to 17 Lands for all the data that they help us aggregate. Viral Misnomer, Hululu, Grant Wu, ZTM. Follow those people if you want to know what's going on, or if you want to bother them with question and not me. Hi, Jean Emmanuel. I didn't forget about you. Nice that you're in the chat. Also, thanks to Fake Jake Brown, aka Uncle Cardboard. Come on, Uncle Cardboard, if you're still in the chat, get your praise. He's the person that makes it possible in the podcast form, because I'm absolutely technologically incompetent, and he is. And as we are talking about the podcast version, thanks to Assescu and Mana Junkie for the music that I'm using as the intro there. And with that, I'll see you next week.